Hi everyone, it's ITX from Vintage Mobile Phones again. And as promised, I want to talk about something special today because we're going to talk about the Ericsson T68, the T68M, and the Sony Ericsson T68i. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you that now I actually have a script, so hooray! Maybe things will get a little bit better today. But so let's start. The year was 2001, and Ericsson was a big player in the 90s and also in the late 90s, early 2000s, but they were a bit struggling. They still had their things that they do nowadays, like, for example, the networking, the antennas, and everything. They're still in this business and it's quite successful, but the phones themselves, they didn't sell very well. Ericsson was struggling. On the other hand, there was Sony. Sony also had made a few mediocre, successful phones in the late 90s and early 2000s, but they were also kind of struggling in the phone business. So the two struggling phone companies, being successful in other fields but not too successful in the phone field, decided to make a joint venture. And this is where it gets interesting, because in the year 2001, Ericsson had already made what I like to call their last big thing, the last big phone, if you will, and it was called the Ericsson T68. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Ericsson T68, or T68M, as its correct description. And this phone was really cool. I mean, it had everything. It was one of the first phones to introduce color display, color screen. And it had a lot of cool stuff. I mean, it had tons of games, themes. You could compose melodies. You could make your own pictures. It was cool. Oh, and it also got Tetris, for example. Quite a cool thing, if you ask me. But yeah, eventually, Ericsson is a phone company. As I said, they struggled a bit. So after the joint venture happened and the Ericsson T68M, as it's called professionally, was around for quite some time, Sony Ericsson, the new phone company that had been founded 100% out of 50% out of Ericsson and 50% out of Sony, they decided to release basically the same phone as their first phone. This also happened in other fields, like in the car industry. Some car manufacturers do this if they form a joint venture. It's the safe way, if you will, because having to develop an entirely new phone, losing years and years of marketing with that wasn't really what Sony and Ericsson intended. They wanted to have a really big thing for the start. So they took the already quite successful Ericsson T68 or T68M, and they upgraded it a little bit and gave it a new software and called it the Sony Ericsson T68i. So, as I said, it had a new software, and let's turn it on. The Ericsson T68M, while being a color display phone, had two major important things missing that the Sony Ericsson introduced. The first thing, the Sony Ericsson T68i was one of the first phones to introduce MMS messaging. It was this multimedia thing where you can send and receive highly compressed pictures and also videos. And this was the major update, but also another major update was the introduction of the first attachable camera on a phone. This was also a first, and the cool thing about that was that the camera had its viewfinder on the display, and this was a world first. I mean, there were certain phones before that had a camera even integrated, but success, marketing success speaking, this was really the first big successful phone to feature cameras. So, of course, people that had bought the Ericsson T68M, they were a bit angry, and they thought, why can't we have these cool features? I mean, it's basically the same phone. So Sony Ericsson decided to release an update, and many people did the update. That's why it's incredibly rare to find an Ericsson T68M with a stock software. I was really lucky to find this one, and I think it's really cool because it was the last breath, the last glimpse of Ericsson, if you will, before they eventually ceased to exist as a phone company. So I think that's a quite cool story, a side story, it doesn't matter, but it's still very cool. So the Sony Ericsson, it introduced, no, I don't want to delete, it introduced MMS, as I said here. Unfortunately, there aren't any MMS here, but maybe, yeah, I think that's the one. There are a few templates that you can play. Quite a neat feature, but MMS is dead by now, but it was a cool new thing back then, so we have to respect that. So okay, there was the Ericsson T68M and there was the Sony Ericsson T68i, and basically this is where the story ends. In most cases, this is where press articles and YouTubers and other people basically end their videos. Thanks for watching and bye bye. But no, I would like to tell you another very interesting bit of history, because Ericsson was kind of dead, but they still existed in a way, but also almost parallel to that, Sony Ericsson was founded. And in this weird, very brief period of time, there was also another phone, a third phone, and it's quite a weird Frankenstein if you ask me. And I will show you. It's this one. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, that's the same phone as this. No, it's not. Because this is the Ericsson T68M. This is the Sony Ericsson T68i. But this is the Sony Ericsson T68M. It has the Sony Ericsson software on it, unfortunately. But to my knowledge, it was also out of the factory available with the stock Ericsson software. So it was really an incredibly weird hybrid that basically shouldn't even exist, but it existed for a very brief, short period of time. And yeah, to show you what I mean, I'm going to open up the two phones. We don't need the Sony Ericsson, but we need the two Ericssons. So, no, this one first. As you can see, this phone has the Ericsson branding. Everything is Ericsson here. No mentioning of Sony whatsoever. So the type number, etc. But if we open up this one, you can see it also says T68M here. But surprisingly, here it says Sony Ericsson. So it was actually this weird hybrid that shouldn't even exist. It's like a paradox. It's a phone by Ericsson, branded with Sony Ericsson logos. So quite a weird thing, if you ask me. The thing is, of course, as I said before, Sony Ericsson was this new hip company, and they had the big thing with the Sony Ericsson T68i. But before that, quite a few months passed without anything, because if the company was formed in late 2001, as far as I remember. It was, I think, October, November 2001 or something. And the Sony Ericsson T68i, it didn't came out until the first quarter of 2002. And for this short, brief period of time, they had to come up with something that they could sell. Because you have to remember, entirely new company. They were promising a lot of things, and the future looked bright for them, etc., etc. But on the other hand, they also had to make money, plain and simple. And I think, that's my conclusion to all that. That's why they decided to stuck a Sony Ericsson logo on an Ericsson phone and sell it. Of course, Ericsson still had all the parts, and Ericsson had covers lying around that were branded with Ericsson. So why not take a thing that is already pretty good and just produce it further? The production lines, after all, they remained the same basically. I think also for the Sony Ericsson T68i, they just revised the cover, as you can tell, quite a bit on the front, but every other angle is basically the same. So okay, they had the production lines, they had the keys lying around, the displays, the chips and everything. So for a very, very short, brief period of time, this Frankenstein phone existed. So in part 2 of this video, I would like to introduce to you the other extremely big feature that was kind of a world first on this phone, but it eventually became the go-to feature that every phone has nowadays, and it's of course the camera. This was the very first attachable clip-on camera, if you will, and while the Ericsson T68M couldn't, with the original software, recognize it, the updated Ericsson T68s and also of course the Sony Ericsson T68Is, they could communicate with the camera. That's why it's called Communicam. And you were able to take pictures. So, as I said before, the display acted as the viewfinder. And you can see here, it's a mess, really. It's probably the worst picture quality of every phone I know. But yeah, who cares? It was the very first time that you could take pictures with your phone, basically, and use the display as the viewfinder. This was revolutionary. And the thing is, as I told you in the last video, and it's still the case here, every time a new feature gets introduced on a phone, you can be sure it's a mess and people will hate it and people will say, why do we even need this? I clearly remember back in the days when this came out, there were classmates and also adults, and I read press articles and everything, and people said, why do we even need this? Why do we need to take pictures with our phone? I mean, that's ridiculous. We have a camera. We could also take our camera, always take our camera with us, make photos like a normal person would do. And why would you need such a pixelated, bad camera that takes the worst photos that you cannot even tell which person is who? And also it took up quite a lot of space, actually, and the phone didn't have very much space. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it was just a few megabytes or something. So the the storage was filled up with basically 10 phones or something, 10 photos or something. So it was useless, if you ask me. But okay, as we all know the story, cameras on a phone, they started to become better and better. There were other phones that had attachable cameras, but shortly afterwards, companies started to integrate cameras into the phone. And that's, of course, where everything took off. And basically, overnight, cameras became the new hip thing, the huge success. And yeah, to nowadays, you wouldn't even think of taking a camera, a second separate camera with you on the holidays, only if you are really into photography or if you want to take high resolution pictures for, I don't know, if it's the first holidays with your kid or something. But for me, speaking of my experience, if I go on a holiday, of course, it's complicated now with Corona and everything, but let's say if it wasn't for Corona, if I go on a holiday, then why would I take the phone and also a separate camera with me? So I had to charge two things. I had to always take care that two things are charged at the same time. I had to carry both things with me all the time. There is the risk of the camera getting stolen or the phone getting stolen. But with the combination of phone and camera in one device, I always have it with me. I have it in my pocket. I can take it out whenever I want. And I'm immediately ready to take a beautiful picture. And as we all know, phones nowadays with the software integrated, they take beautiful pictures. I mean, you couldn't even tell if you are an amateur photographer if which photo was taken with a professional DSLR and which photo was taken with the phone. That's really the case. So yeah, as I said before, it was the same with the Nokia 7110. Internet for the first time on a phone, it sucked balls. I mean, let's be honest. But nowadays, every phone is a portable computer with internet integrated, with full internet. So, and if it wasn't for phones like the 7110 or in this case the Sony Ericsson T68i, the things on a phone would be quite a lot different, I think. So in conclusion, the Sony Ericsson T68M, T68i was quite a huge success, and it was a real big thing, and people are still talking about it today, and I think there's a reason for it. And the interesting thing with the Ericsson and Sony Ericsson hybrid was also something that I didn't know before. I just found out because this was the first one I got, the first Ericsson as I thought, but when I received it and opened it up, I found out about the whole thing with the Sony Ericsson branding on an Ericsson phone, and it got me thinking, well, it's quite a clever marketing if you ask me. Sony Ericsson was around quite recently, just being founded, and for a brief period of time, they had to come up with something to transfer from the Ericsson era to the Sony Ericsson era, and this is where this hybrid came about. And I think that's just a very cool fact that not many people tell you. And I never heard about this prior to me making this video. And yeah, I think that's just an interesting fact that most people overlook, but it's quite an important part of the whole history of Sony Ericsson and how it came about. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope you found the video a bit better now that I included a script that I read from the script. If you like the video, leave a thumbs up, comment below, and please subscribe. There will be a lot more videos in the future. This was only the tip of the iceberg, as I said. I have a lot more cool phones, but These three phones, I mean, apart from my Nokia phones, so of course Nokia is my favorite brand, but apart from Nokia, this is probably my second favorite phone of all time. It it's such an interesting history, such an interesting backstory, and for a phone that was released in 2001, this was a really big thing, and it had everything you needed back then. It was the jack of all trades, and I think it's still a very cool phone. It's so small, it's so simple, and this simple technology, uh, I really wish phones today would look more like this and not like the huge, big, flat things. I don't know. Phones back then just had a bit more of soul, and that's why I love them so much. And that's also the reason why I collect phones. Every phone that I own in my collection, it has a different soul, a different story to tell, just from the looks of it, and that's quite impressive if you ask me. So, thank you guys for watching, and bye bye.